Right, let's discuss this topic even further. I'm joined now by Reagen Allen, Provincial Community Safety and Police Oversight MEC, as well as Dr. Simon Howell, UCT's Centre of Criminology, who's on the phone, as well as Ndithini Tyhido from the Khayelitsha Development Forum. Gentlemen, a very good afternoon to you. Thank you so much for joining us. Perhaps I'd like to direct my first question to MEC Allen. Thank you for your time. The problem is really one that has affected the lives of communities in the most incredible way. It's unbearable. They're saying that they feel helpless and that their cries are falling on deaf ears, and they now want to speak to these gangs directly. What is your reaction?
Thank you, firstly, for having me here. I think first and foremost, I must state that we've seen an escalation in gang violence across our province. And what that means is that as a member of the executive, my call has been clear to gangsters, is that if they want to contribute to society in any way, they should actually give themselves up and go to SAPS. They are people of interest. They have, by and large, committed heinous crimes. I've witnessed how one person in Manenberg in the year 2020 passed away because her boyfriend, a gang member, was hiding behind her when a rival gang member shot at them. So I've seen the effects in that regard, but in us talking to gangsters, I think that will defeat the purpose. Gangsters are criminals. Gangsters are not law-abiding citizens, and SAPS should ultimately do the job in that regard. We have seen how we have fostered relationships with the South African Police Service here in the Western Cape to ultimately strengthen the hand of SAPS in the Western Cape, because besides a 10% vacancy rate that we have here, besides severe chronic under-resourcing that we have in the Western Cape, we have added extra boots on the ground in terms of the Western Cape safety plan, and we have seen successes in that regard. Successes in Nyanga, successes in Kraaifontein, in Mitchell's Plain, but we know whenever one person passes away or dies due to gang violence, we know it reverberates through our communities and it adds a burden on a society that's already struggling. So yes, if any member of the public wants to speak to a gangster, if they want to engage that gangster, it would be my role to say that from where I'm sitting, I would want that gangster to ultimately give themselves up. I want SAPS to do their job, because we are not seeing enough arrests and we are not seeing enough convictions. I have received a parliamentary reply as well that stated between May 2020 and April 2021, there were 0 convictions in 8 of the top 10 murder stations here in the Western Cape. So we've seen that if convictions aren't obtained, we know that gangsters are then feeling emboldened, and we know how rivalry and gang turfs are escalating due to the drug trade. Because what we've also done is that in my capacity, prior to my role now, I've submitted a request to the police ombudsman to investigate inefficiencies in terms of shutting down known drug houses, because we do know the transportation as well as the manufacturing of illegal drugs is contributing to organized crime, and it's fueling gang violence in our communities. And I'm trusting that investigation will uncover a number of matters so now we can systematically disorganize organized crime here in the Western Cape.
Perhaps let's hold that thought as I speak to Dr. Howell. Dr. Howell, we're listening to MEC Reagen Allen speaking about they've seen successes, but the numbers are increasing. Also, perhaps urging the gang members to come forward and take themselves in, which is not going to happen. It hasn't happened. There are 0 convictions. Exactly how significant are the statistics?
Well, I think the statistics give credence to the idea that, or bring into question the idea that policing is the correct response or the only response to gangsters. And I mean, policing has a role to play, certainly, and an important one. But I think, we have been policing and escalating policing and throwing in the military in this war against gangs, and frankly, I mean, this has been going on for quite a number of years, and I don't think we've seen much success. So for me, the question is, is this the correct response and is the correct path to take? I think gangs are a function or a product of very complex socio-economic and political sort of historic manifestations. And, simply policing the gangs is a reactive attempt at, sort of dealing with these things when, in fact, we fail to deal with the underlying causes of gangsterism. And I think in the long term, unless we deal with the underlying causes and the reasons why young people want to join gangs, we are simply going to be chasing our tails, in the sense that, we'll continue to police these problems. Policing is not really it doesn't really deal with the significant underlying social and economic issues itself. Policing is ultimately a reactive undertaking and one that, as I've said, has a role to play, but ultimately is one that doesn't really deal with those root causes. And I think until such time as we begin dealing with them, well, we're just not going to really get anywhere.
Ndithini, let me bring you into the conversation. What do you think needs to be put on the table to try and mitigate this escalation of gang violence?
Thank you very much, and good evening to your listeners as well. I think my brother, and congratulations to MEC Reagen Ellen. And I think the doctor has got it covered. The problem here is that they are under socio-economic issues that compounds the situation that all the townships and the areas in the Cape Flats find themselves in the province of the Western Cape. And I think I agree with the doctor that the police would say to you that we arrest people, they get released by justice. And then justice is going to say to you, these people have got addresses and all of that. So this matter requires a consolidated all-of-society type approach, because the issues that the communities face right now is a situation where business is going to say to you, we are scared to come and invest to Khayelitsha. Then you ask a second question, what do you do to make that area investable? And you find there's no activity that is going to happen there. And really what we are saying as communities, government, all three spheres of government, there's no choice. We all have no choice but to act in collaboration.
MEC Allen, perhaps let me come back to you in terms of tabling a solution and perhaps trying to come up with a plan that is not reactive policing, perhaps looking at the intelligence-driven operations that need to be conducted on the ground to tackle this really, really horrible situation. Okay, I think we may have appear to have lost MEC Allen, but let me now direct my question to Dr. Howell. Dr. Howell, let's talk about this, reactive policing that you make mention of. Confronting the causes of gang violence will certainly need to embody a more honest conversation, tackling the root causes of the bigger problem.
Yeah, exactly. So, gangsterism, the results of gangsterism are criminal concerns, but the drivers of gangsterism are social concerns. So I think, as we mentioned, that we need a whole of society approach in which we deal with gangsterism by utilizing multiple departments and engaging with the multiple facets of issue, or the multifaceted issues that drive gangsterism. So that involves primarily people like departments like the Department of Education, Department of Social Development, Department of Health, and of course the police. And everyone has a role to play here, but dealing with these issues requires a long-term vision as well, and not simply one that it helps, or it feels good at least for people to see gangsters being arrested, but arrests simply don't really lead to convictions, I don't think, and they simply lead to more anger and more violence. So long-term solutions include education and giving especially young men, hope and a future that is a viable and legitimate one. To simply say, there needs to be an alternative to gangsterism that people want to pursue. And I think often in communities there are no alternatives, or at least the alternatives that exist aren't as attractive as gangsterism. And that's why young men join gangs.
Ndithini, what has your account been in terms of the reasons why more and more young people are joining gangs and also, looking for a sense of belonging because of the reality of the socio-economic circumstances?
Look, Dr. Howell is putting it correctly. This issue has to be entertained or at least be interacted with from the basis of scientific analysis and systemic response, because there is an intended problem created by politicians in responding to this. For instance, in the case of the Western Cape and Cape Town, you hear people that mainly that the colored areas were the areas infested with gangs, but people are dying in multiplicity now in areas such as Khayelitsha. Now, the response has been that resources are not following where the problems are at. I'll give you one example, my sister, here, that if you notice in the last two weeks, the city of Cape Town has published something relating to the prioritization of camera systems as one deterrent. And this did not include Khayelitsha, but at the exact time, it's where you get more mass killings. Now, the issue here is that we as communities, we must refuse politicians trying to sow divisions between us whilst all of us are affected and being killed by gangsterism. There are no diversion programs in our communities, generally and across the Cape Flats. There's no programs where government can point to certain things. It's one thing for politicians to say, in my own department, I've got number of cops or number of patrollers that I myself and this department are moving with. And this is trying to sow divisions amongst communities on the basis of race as a first point, and also on the basis of resource allocation.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your time, Ndithini, Tyhido. Let's leave it there with you as I conclude my conversation here with Dr. Howell. Dr. Howell, there are no diversion programs, which also speaks to the root causes of why gangs may be attractive to young people. I'm still joined on the line by Reagen Allen, Provincial Community Safety and Police Oversight MEC, as well as Dr. Simon Howell from UCT Center of Criminology, who's on the phone. MEC Allen, you were speaking to my colleague Tim Tongana, and as we perhaps listened to the voices on the ground, the people facing the torment day by day, they say that they're afraid to report these incidents as they witness police failing to take action. A gentleman there speaking about how police saw crimes and still didn't take any action, speaking to instructions from the top.
Thank you so much. And as I was listening to the segment, I was one of those boys growing up in Mitchell's Plain in the year 2004. Someone came to my house and said, Reagen, if you don't leave Mitchell's Plain and come with me, you will die. And I went to go and live at a children's home in Bridgetown in Athlone. And as we've heard the segment, I fully understand that my story is not unique, because there's still been an escalation in terms of drug abuse and gang violence. Earlier on, there was a comment made just before I was cut off in terms of the increase in SAPs or the increase in policing.
Yes.
For the record, I want to state that there's actually been a decrease in terms of the granted establishment that has been earmarked for the Western Cape over a 10-year period. So we actually have less SAPS members now than what we had 10 years ago. Hence, the Western Cape Safety Plan, which is a two-pronged approach. One, yes, policing, because that is still relevant. Hence, we have LEAP officers, which is in our key hotspot areas. It's based on data and evidence-based policing, where we know where to target and where to deploy. But also in terms of looking at the root causes of crime. I've been very clear, and in terms of my role, even as a chairperson prior to taking up the position of MEC, was to ensure that the whole of government approach. If we look at social development, for example, social development in the Western Cape is tasked with, and they are responsible to identify, profile, and to support young people at risk, young people that are prone to violent behavior or criminal behavior, and to then deliver evidence-based parenting programs that will focus on reducing violence. If we look at community safety, we have the Chrysalis Academy, where a number of our young people can go to undergo training, and they are able to develop themselves. There's stuff happening in cultural affairs and sport as well, where we coordinate sporting activities after school programs. We have a MOD center, which is a mass opportunity and development center for after school in a number of our hotspot areas across the province, in understanding that young people needed space. There's stuff we do in finance, economic development, and tourism in order to upskill opportunities for young people. But it is very clear, national government, the City of Cape Town, the Western Cape government, once we are able to work together and foster not only relationships with communities and work with stakeholders, work with academia, I firmly believe that we will be able to see effective change in our communities. It becomes imperative on us as elected officials to ensure that the whole of government approach, the whole of society approach, working with neighborhood watches, we've seen now we have 16,000 neighborhood watches. We assist, train, and capacitate our neighborhood watchers here in the Western Cape, and they make up over 441 neighborhood watchers together with CPF members. And we are seeing how that safety, that extra eyes and ears on the ground is making a dent. And the last crime stats, just before I end off, the last crime stats actually indicated that Nyanga is no longer the murder capital of South Africa, because we've seen how neighborhood watchers, men and women, CPFs, men and women, also dedicated SAPS officials in that40% were able to jointly work together with a leap deployment in Nyanga. Kraaifontein had a drop of 40.5% in the murder rate. So even though we've seen successes, I do know there's a long way to go. Even Khayelitsha, during the last crime stats, we know the mass shootings now that happened in this quarter. But in the last quarter, Khayelitsha actually had a 12.5% drop in the murder rate compared to the quarter focusing on last year. So there is successes, but we need those convictions. But it's not only a policing matter. It is the whole of government and the whole of society, and my role. And what I want to foster is to see how we can come together. Because if I must choose between a life and a vote, I will always go towards a life, because I understand how difficult it is for communities. I have family that live in Manenberg. I have people that live in Nova Park. I grew up in Mitchell's Plain. We know, but action is needed. So thank you for having this discussion. This is very close to my heart, so thank you.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure there. But before we wrap up, let me just go back to Dr. Howell. Dr. Howell, just listening in to MEC Allen, speaking about some solutions, some slow solutions that are slowly making some strides in terms of improving the lives of the young men who are really at the center of this massive, vicious cycle, forcefully recruited to these gangs. How does one break away? I mean, we heard one young man speaking there saying that the only way he is almost able to move away is to move to a different part of the area and live with family and then slowly come back. But even still, he's still not safe.
So, I mean, I'm glad that some of these programs have been mentioned. So, I mean, for instance, the Chrysalis Academy has seen some success in dealing with, these issues and providing alternatives for young people. I think ultimately, it's a question of resources in the Western Cape and whether the national government will play a role. And secondly, it's for me, it's about embedding these programs into the education system. And into even things as early as, the first sort of 1,000 days and, with pregnant women and pregnant mothers, so as that young people can be given alternatives and given every opportunity they can. Obviously, that requires a lot of resources, which, I think are often funneled towards policing. And again, the policing response has not necessarily been the most effective response in many instances. So I think it's about rechanneling or reconfiguring our understanding of what gangsterism is, so as that we can begin dealing with it in a more cohesive manner and a more effective manner. And that, of course, I mean, that's not to say that policing doesn't have that role, but rather to say that emphasis needs to be placed on education and skills development and finding alternatives for young people, which ultimately in the city of Cape Town itself may go as far as requiring that we think about the very design and structure of the city itself and transport corridors and how to make how to give people access to the job market and to the city itself.